Thank you so much. You're most kind. Asante. Well, Mr. President, the Provost, professors and students and friends, it is a great privilege for me to be here at the Sacramento State Campus to share with you a few moments, unfortunately too few, about the issues that we really care about, and that's the issue of the environment. And as the Provost has said, when the Norwegian Nobel Committee decided to focus on the environment, it was a historic decision, because those of you who have been following the Nobel Peace Prize history, it's 100 years history plus, it has been focusing on different issues at different times, trying to open up our eyes on the issues that matter at that time. And when it first started, it actually used to honor people who would go, especially with the Red Cross, go to the battlefield and take the wounded and take care of them, or take the dead and bury them with dignity. Later on, it honored people who tried to separate warring communities and nations and brought them to the negotiation table to negotiate for peace. And much later, it started focusing on the fact that you cannot have peace if you do not have respect for human rights. And so people who worked for human rights were honored by the committee. And it was not until 2004 that the committee saw that it was time to challenge the world on the linkage between what we do with our environment, how we manage ourselves, and peace. And it wanted to challenge us to reconsider the concept of peace and security, and to see that if we manage our resources responsibly, if we are accountable, if we share those resources equitably, if we are inclusive, we are more likely to preempt conflict. However, we can only do that if we govern ourselves in a certain way. And they wanted to emphasize the need for people to have a democratic space, for lack of a better word. Let us call it democratic. But it means an environment in which we respect human rights, the rule of law, where we embrace everybody in the community, where we try to ensure that the minority will be heard, even if the majority will eventually have their way, that everybody in the community will feel that they are also included and they matter. That if we do that, we are more likely to preempt causes of conflict. But if we don't do that, it is very difficult for us to achieve that dream of peace. And therefore, we need to relearn what peace and security means. That peace and security means that we manage our resources more responsibly and accountably, also considering the future generations, that we govern ourselves in systems that respect the rule of law and human rights, and we become more inclusive in the way we govern ourselves. And when you look at many of the conflicts in the world today, you will notice that many of them, when you go below the camouflage of religion, camouflage of ethnicity, camouflage of race, you will get, when you get to the core of why that conflict is on, you will see that it is about competition of resources. Who is going to access these resources? Who is going to use them? Who is going to be excluded? And so whether it is a very local conflict, such as some of the conflicts we are dealing with in our country, where people would be fighting over a watering hole because the land has become very dry and there is only 1 or 2 holes which still have water, and communities are trying to get water for themselves and for their livestock, and as a result of the competition, they fight over water and they kill each other. Or whether it is a situation where again due to degeneration of the environment, especially pastoral communities would move their livestock to areas where there is grass, sometimes somebody else's grass, sometimes somebody else's farm, and then there is a conflict because the pastoral communities are trying to access fodder for the animals, grasses, or even water. Or whether it is a more regional conflict like Darfur, or like the conflicts we have seen in the Congo, Somalia, Sierra Leone, or even bigger conflicts such as we have in the Middle East. Many of these conflicts, just study them and go below the camouflage and you will discover that this is the core, is the competition over resources. So if we have to live in peace and security, we have to rethink how to deal with these issues. Because people who feel that like they're being excluded, people who feel like they're being exploited, people who feel like they are not given an opportunity, and especially if they are their resources and they become victims in their own lands, they react. And sometimes they may react violently, and that will threaten our peace and security. And as we have seen, due to the nature of the world in which we live, the conflict may be very far away from you, but somehow it reaches you. If it doesn't reach you directly, it reaches you through the television and it affects you. So it is not very easy for us to run away from these conflicts anymore. So for us to experience peace, therefore, we need to rethink this concept. And that's what the challenge the Norwegian Nobel Committee was giving to the world. And my responsibility as a peace laureate for the environment is to share with the world, to share with the young people, to share with the governments, to share with the decision makers, so that we can begin to evolve a new consciousness that would help us to rethink peace and security. It's not easy because we are already conditioned to a different way of thinking. But there were times when human rights was a new concept, when people did not believe that everybody has a right. Now nobody argues about that. So even this, if we think about it, if we internalize it, if we analyze it, eventually we can reach a critical mass of people who really believe that we have to rethink the concept of peace and security and see the linkage between the three pillars, what I call the three pillars for peace. Now, in my trying to pass that message, I often use the traditional African stool. And I say a traditional African stool has 3 legs, and these 3 legs must be stable enough to allow you to sit on the stool. But if you, and the stool is crafted out of one block. So the craftsman crafts the legs, and at the same time he crafts or she crafts the seat where you eventually sit on. Now, if it is well crafted, you can sit on that stool and you feel stable. But if it is not well crafted, say the stool has 2 legs, or the stool has 1 leg, or the stool has no legs whatsoever, then you have a failed state. The basin, I see the basin as the forum where development will take place if the 3 pillars are strong. The pillar of sustainable management of resources, the pillar of good governance that incorporates human rights and all that, and the pillar of peace. Now, for me, when I started planting trees some 30 years ago, I wasn't really thinking the way I'm thinking now. I was responding to the felt needs of communities. But what I didn't know then, and I gradually learned, is the linkage between the problems that my people were facing and the environment. I eventually came to learn that a degraded environment could not sustain a people's livelihood. And so I started by telling the women who were my audience at that time that we can rehabilitate the environment and give them what they were looking for: firewood, food, protection of their soils from soil erosion, fodder for their animals, just meet the felt needs of their households. But in the course of that, I came to realize that even simple things and benign things like tree planting can become a threat to a government that doesn't embrace the concept of freedom, the concept of democratic governance. And so even though I was just telling women to plant trees and I was organizing them around tree planting, I became a threat to the government because I was organizing, I was informing, I was empowering. And that was a threat because dictators thrive because citizens are disempowered. They have fear in them. They cannot challenge their leaders. They cannot hold their leaders accountable. So trying to empower citizens so that they can challenge bad leadership became a threat. So when you read the book, you will see areas where, I know you have read the book, so you understand what I'm talking about, that you get to a point where, to my surprise, doing something good became a threat to my life. But that was, for me, a big lesson. And a lot of what I share in that book was not a blueprint. There are things that happened to me in the course of the journey. And I just thought that I was doing the good thing that I ought to do after having spent some time here in America, received the education, and then I went back home and I was trying to do what most of us hope to do, and that is change the society in which we live and make it better. So in trying to make my society better, I became a threat. But I also knew that I was a threat because I was trying to uplift the quality of life of the people, to inform the people, and to make the people have the courage to challenge their leaders so that their leaders would govern them more responsibly, more accountably, that the leaders would use the resources more responsibly, and the leaders would not practice corruption, disrespect human rights, and the rule of law. Because I knew by doing that, it could only make the life of the people worse, and eventually there will be conflict in our country. And indeed, at some point, as you see in the book, there were conflicts, and people started fighting each other, mostly over land, mostly over water. And so I know that I don't have much time, and I know I have to answer some of these questions, but in an effort to reflect on what I have written in that book, one of the issues that definitely has impacted on our people very seriously, and is an issue of globalization, is the issue of debt. And some of you may be familiar with the issue of the debt. In the year 2000, we launched a global campaign that was directed from London by a wonderful lady called Anna Peterford. Some of you probably know her. And I was coordinating the campaign in Africa. And it was a global campaign, and we were trying to raise consciousness on the fact that the so-called debts, especially debts that were incurred during the time that governments were being ruled by dictators, are debts that are illegitimate. Because those debts were the money was borrowed by people who had no mandate from their people. They borrowed the money in the name of their people, but they did not use that money for their people. A lot of that money was stolen. A lot of that money never reached the country of the leaders that borrowed. And those who lent that money knew that. And they kept lending that money time and time again to the same corrupt leaders, knowing very well that the money was not being used for the purpose it was given. So what we have been saying is that, of course, our leaders were at fault. And of course, those leaders should be in jail. But what are we going to do with the managers in the banks who gave them the money, knowing very well that these leaders were corrupt and we are not going to use the money for the purpose for which they were borrowing? Are these managers of the banks angels and the borrowers are devils? Or are we dealing here with a global form of corruption where the victim is the ordinary person who doesn't even know what the hell is going on?
Yeah.
And we were saying, for that reason, we must not punish those people who really didn't know what was going on. And as it is, because a lot of that money has been paid several times over, it's not as if governments or even banks are being asked to forgive. We have been saying forgive the debt. And it sounds bad because it's as if these Africans borrowed money and they are trying to say forgive. They don't want to pay back. The money has been paid several times over if you follow the arithmetic there. But because of the way the system was structured, even our future generations will not have paid the debt. We will be paying those debts till eternity. And so that's one of the globalized activities that definitely undermine sustainable development. Because when people are paying that kind of money, they are literally impoverished. And when they become impoverished, they undermine the environment. They start scraping the land. They cut, to cut a long story short, they will cut the last tree to cook their last meal. And so you cannot promote sustainable development when you have a lot of poor people. And in Kenya, for example, as we speak, 50%, more than 50% of our people live on $1 a day. So how can a person living on $1 a day protect the environment? It's difficult because that person is thinking about today, not about tomorrow. So you tell him about climate change, and you tell him that the seas will rise, and you tell him that the snow and ice is melting on Mount Kenya and Mount Kilimanjaro, that the rains will fail, that the crops will fail, that there is famine, there will be famine, and maybe there will be migration of people from one region to the other, and they want to say that all seems like a very interesting story, but I'm concerned about now. And those are the issues that to me are brought home by globalization. And because the issues are up there, quite often the people at the ground don't understand. But we must make the linkage between what is happening at the international level to what eventually happens at the local level. When people are that poor, they cannot educate their children. They cannot send their children to college. So they will not escape the cycle of poverty. Instead, many of these governments are more willing to give you aid. And aid is like help. When you are in intensive care unit and you are being given some oxygen, of course people will say you are alive, but you are really between here and there. And as such, you cannot be very useful. And therefore, people who are very poor, people who are overburdened by these practices become very, very vulnerable. And when there is a small crisis in weather patterns, they are the first to starve. And then we send alerts all over the world, and people are very quick to bring in aid. The other aspect of that aid, which is also part of globalization, is that it makes people very dependable, or rather dependent. And dependent, you can kill people by making them dependent. And I don't know where we will hit the balance between helping a person to help himself and making a person so dependent that they will never help themselves. Now, on the issue of women, because I know we don't have much time, on the issue of women, women in Kenya have made a lot of stride. And I think I'm a good example of what has happened to the women in the last 60 years or so. My mother and father were the first generation to learn how to read and write. And so in the book, you see how we were excited about being able to read and write. And so we are still a very young nation that way. And the women are still struggling. But my experience is, if you're living in a country where development is at the level where I'm saying that more than 50% of people are living on $1 a day, people, that means women, men, and children. So sometimes when I'm in the rural areas and I'm confronted with a question like this, I want to say, okay, the women have it really bad, because they have to work in the field, they have to produce food, they have to fetch water, sometimes long distances, they have to look for firewood. But where are the men? It's not as if the men are celebrating either. They too are in the same situation. They are just as badly off. So when you have certain situations in the country, the worry for me is not just the women, it's just the society. And that is why, as Greenbelt movement, when we go into a community, we look at the community holistically. And although we work with the women, because women are more receptive to us, maybe because we are women. But I think mostly because it is the women who work on the land. It's the women who fetch water. It's the women who look for firewood. So when the environment is degraded, it's the women who feel the impact most negatively, because they are worried about children. Men quite often can escape and go to the urban centers looking for jobs. Whether they find jobs or not, that's another matter, but they have gone. So for the women, they are more responsive. And so we have found it much easier to work with the women. But I should also add that once we start, even the men who haven't escaped into the urban centers come and join in. And for me, therefore, the question of where are the women? Well, most women are exactly where their men are. You cannot separate the women from the men. It's very, very important that we look at societies holistically. That doesn't mean women should not be given affirmative action. And in fact, in Kenya, if you have been following the story in Kenya, we just lost a bill in Parliament where we were trying to introduce a law that would allow for 50 women to go into Parliament through affirmative action without having to go through the electoral process. This would have given us at least 50 women in a house of about 300 members of Parliament. At the moment, we are about 220 members of Parliament, and women are 18. So a very, very small number. And in fact, about half of them have been nominated, so affirmative action in a small way. Now, why did that bill fail? Because the men who are in the majority did not want to see 50 women come into Parliament through affirmative action. They said, you want to come to Parliament? Go through the process, the electoral process. But they also argued in a way that I think challenges the way we also work with the women. They said, in this country, 52% of the population is women, which is true in Kenya. We are slightly more than the men. So, if that is so, how come you women cannot vote your own into Parliament? Why do you need the men to give you an opportunity to go in there without going through the electoral process when it is the same women who are going to elect those men? So the question we have been asking is, why is it that women do not vote for other women? Why is it that women would rather vote useless men into Parliament? Part of it is that we women And any people, anywhere, who have been marginalized, who have been excluded, who have been socialized to believe that they're not good enough, somehow those people never put themselves into positions of power. Because they actually have been socialized to believe that they are not good enough. So women have to be sufficiently empowered to believe in themselves. So the Green Belt movement has also this a program which we call civic and environmental education, where we try to empower women so that we can believe in ourselves and vote each other into positions of authority. Now, when we are in positions of authority, like I am, for example, then you know that you are not only there for yourself, you are there for all women. And I can assure you that in this country, Hillary Clinton is trying to become the next president of the United States. And I can tell you that all women have their eyes on America to see whether the American people are going to give a woman a chance. Because if she wins, she of course wins not only for herself, but for all women. So when a woman is put in a position of authority and she performs well, which I hope she would, then it is not a credit only for her, it's a credit for all women. So we have a very heavy responsibility, we women, to raise our own. Yes, finally I saw her. To raise the responsibility, to raise the profile of the women, and to give women the confidence they need. And I want you to understand that this is not the dilemma of women. This is the dilemma of any people who have been given something to question about themselves. And that's why in the book, sometimes I'm writing partly to help people understand that sometimes you can be given a psyche that is not yours. I say, I wanted to be able to look at myself through my own mirror. And it was America that actually gave me the courage to pick my own mirror and look at myself. And for example, reclaim my name and say, my name is Wangari. They have called me Miriam, they have called me Mary, they have called me Josephine, they have called me a lot of names. But now I know my name is what my mother called me when I was born. That was my name. And from that on, I became myself. And so, especially at home, where we are very, very religious, we are at a time when we are very, very religious. And many people sometimes ask me, are you baptized? Are you a Christian? And I tell them, you know, I am actually a follower of Christ. But when I go to heaven, I want to be able to speak to Jesus. And when he asks me, who are you? I'm going to tell him, I want to be able to tell him, I'm Wangari. You remember me? I'm that girl who used to plant trees on there. I don't want Jesus to confuse me with some other Mary from other parts of the world, because he knows me and he knows that in our part of the world we didn't have Mary. But we had Wangaris, at least in my community. So I always tell them, I'm quite sure Jesus will not confuse me because he knows us by name. God knows us by name. But at that part of the book, if you came across it, if you read it again, I was trying to search for myself. I was trying to rediscover who I am. I was trying to give myself the confidence that all of us need, who have at some point in our lives been denied the right to be ourselves. Yes. And with respect to education, it's difficult for me to say what education is, but I can tell you this. When I look at you, I think of myself in Atchison, Kansas. And nobody even knows where Atchison, Kansas is. Because when you look at the map of the United States, you see Topeka, Wichita. Nobody bothers to put Atchison. But Atchison is the most important part of this world, because that's where I spent some 4 wonderful years. And when I see you, I see myself at that time. And I think of the fact that I really didn't know what was lying ahead. And as I graduated from college, even though I was looking forward to go to university, I really felt like getting a bachelor was pretty high. And that was about, I felt like I was on top of the world. But gradually, as I went to the University of Pittsburgh and I did my master's, then I joined the University of Nairobi and did my PhD. I almost felt like that's when learning really started. Because education never stops. Your professors will tell you, education never stops. And if ever you stop learning, ever stop educating yourself, then you will definitely have stopped living. And especially when you have gone through the walls of a college, you ought to have that bug in you that wants to know. Because the more you know you don't know. And that is very humbling. And it gives you an energy to continue educating and to continue teaching. Because I was among the first women to be professors in the University of Nairobi. Professor, the word professor, or the name professor, became almost a prefix of my name. So sometimes people don't even call me by my name, they say, Prof. And that is because I became a prof when women were not becoming profs. But I know that, and people ask me these days, are you teaching in a university? I say, I don't teach in a formal university, but am I anxious to teach in the free university of the streets. Wherever I meet people, I feel like this is my time to teach. So learning never stops. And as you learn to share. One of the things that I have come to really appreciate, and this is probably because I was mostly taught by nuns, women who gave themselves up for a higher ideal and spend their whole life living for others. What I have come to realize is that you are happiest when you live beyond yourself. When you live so that others may have it better. When you sacrifice yourself so that others may live better. No matter how much money you have, sometimes it doesn't mean anything. But when you serve, when you improve others, when you give of yourself so that others may have it better, that to me is the best education. That you learned so that you may share that education with others. And what advice can I give? Really, I want to give you an advice by giving you a little story. Some of you may have heard me tell that story, but I want to share that story with you. Because for me, it's the best I can give you as young people. And that's the story of a hummingbird. Some of you may have heard me tell the story of a hummingbird. Now, I had this story in Japan one time. I was there, and I was in a seminar, and a certain Professor Suji told this story. And I loved it, because I felt like I could identify with the hummingbird. But the story is based on the fact that this one day, there was this huge forest that was on fire. And it was raging. And all the animals were coming out of the forest. And they were coming to the edge of the forest. And they were all looking at this forest as it raged. As the fire raged. And they felt helpless. They felt powerless. They couldn't do anything. All they could do was watch as the fire tore through the forest. Except this little hummingbird. The hummingbird said, I'm going to do something about this fire. And so it flew to the nearest spring, or the nearest stream, picked a drop of water, flew back, and put that drop on the fire, and went back and brought another drop and put it on the fire, and kept going up and down and up and down, every time bringing a drop of water and putting it on the fire and hoping this will be the drop that will finish the fire. In the meantime, all the other animals are watching, and they are wondering, and they are discouraging the bird, and they are saying, the fire is too big for all of us, certainly for you, because you're so little. you have a tiny little beak and tiny little two wings and a body hardly visible. I don't know how you can put up that fire. You better come, join us, because you might even get hurt as you try to put off the fire. But the body wouldn't hear of it. It just kept going up and down, every time bringing a drop of water onto the fire. And without wasting its time, it remained very focused. It remained very committed. And it remained very patient. Those three words, I want to leave them with you. Focused, committed, patient. Because things don't happen overnight. The little bird kept going. And the other animals, we should really have been the first to go, because some of them had big beaks that could have picked more water. They kept saying, "What do you think you're doing?" And the little bird, without wasting time, turned around and said, "I am doing the best I can." And that is what I would like to leave with you. Wherever you go, whatever happens to you in your life, just do the best you can. Thank you very much.
So that you all know, there has been a DVD made of the event. It will be archived in our university. If your friends did not get an opportunity to join us here today, hopefully you'll get a chance to view the video. Thank you so much for coming.
That's why I fire